happy Friday, everybody. Happy August 22nd Friday. Money Talks is back for another school year. We're delighted to be back. We were not canceled by the WASBO Board of Directors, we're happy to say. And I'm Mike Berry, Executive Director for WASBO, and back with our usual co-hosts again this year. Brian Adesso is in Menasha. And Andy Weiland is joining us from Oregon. I am at the Money Talks Research Laboratory here in Madison. And our special guest, who we'll turn to in a few minutes, will be WASPO's own Ann Chapman. So good to see you guys. It was a short summer, huh?
It seems to be getting shorter every year. That 3 months that we get off and then we don't work all summer just doesn't seem to be panning out.
That's right. I bet you forgot your login. Um, um, Jeez. So,
Well, Mike, logins are all like 16 characters long now.
oh, it's
So
true.
it's hard to fit that piece of paper underneath your keyboard.
Yeah, my password is still password. Um, so, so today is you have to have DPI's got some deadlines today, right? You got to get your census report in and your calendar report, and I don't remember if there's anything else. But have you did you go door to door to work on your census report to turn into DPI?
My knuckles are all bruised from all the knocking. I forgot that there's doorbells. So,
Okay. I don't know how I was supposed to do a census in Madison. I, my census was so inaccurate. At least it was. So if all of you are listening who are thinking my census isn't exactly accurate, don't worry. The Madison census was worse. So sorry, DPI. We do our best. I read somewhere that the word census is literally in the Wisconsin State Constitution under Article 10, where it deals with school district operations. And so DPI has no flexibility around that. It says census, so they can't waive it. So that's why we have to do this census business. So
I don't know if
we'll
is there a deadline for DPI to launch the grant stuff on Wise grants?
Oh yeah, we're going to get there
Because
in a sec. Well, speaking of DPI, we should apologize because you know how we always have our annual Money Talks, like salute to Wise Data Finance here on Money Talks. We scheduled it for July, and then we're not on in July, so we were not able to do our stirring salute to Wise Data Finance. So Jennifer, Matt, Ben, Olivia, all the people over at DPI, we're sorry. But we have rescheduled our salute to Wise Data Finance for next July, when we also will not be on. So uh, so sorry about that, guys. Well, anyway, yeah, do you want to talk about the due dates and what DPI has released here? That gives us a chance to dive right into the federal funding conversation. And Ann Chapman has joined us. Ann, good morning.
Good morning, everybody.
All right, we've got like 3 or 4 slides on the federal funds. It's been such a roller coaster starting back in like
February.
February. So, well, you've seen these guys before. Okay, let's start here.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm going to give a very quick federal funds update. Everybody is aware of the roller coaster that it's been, the chaos of the cuts and the changes in guidance and regulation, and then the restoring and the refreeze and the freezing and the withdrawing. There's been so much going on since February is when it mostly started. But I would say as of August 15th, as you can see on this slide, DPI put out an Ed Leaders Dispatch notification to superintendents and a few others that I think brings things to a bit of closure, at least for the 25-26 school year. So if you're not already, if you don't already have this on your radar to check the Ed Leaders Dispatch on DPI's website, this would be something you could watch. Your superintendent gets this, but what DPI has put out as of August 15th is that the the federal funding that was frozen for the 24-25 school year, um, has all been released by the federal government, and DPI has reviewed the guidance and the sort of commitments that went along with that funding to make sure there was nothing in there that put everybody in a bad position. You may remember when these federal funds that were frozen, there were just a few different title programs that were frozen most recently. There was some strange guidance in there that said you can't use these funds for, undocumented students and things like that. And so that was rescinded, and the grant notifications were submitted nationally, and DPI has taken a look at it, and they're going to be releasing all this funding to school districts very soon. So in terms of dates, you could probably move to the next slide.
Oh,
Um, in terms of dates, there are three. So there's sort of two, as you all probably know, there's sort of two steps here. DPI will post the allocations in the title programs and IDEA and things, and then it will make it available for budget applications. So as of August 25th, Title 2A, 3A, 4A, and 5 RLIS, which is a rural and low income school program, will all be available for budget applications. As of August 28th, Title 4B, which is the 21st Century Learning funding, will be available for budget applications. Title 1A and IDEA has all already been posted for budgeting. So as of August 28th, all the federal funding that school districts are expecting to get should be posted for budget applications. And so hopefully that means that you'll be, everything will be in place. You'll be able to confirm that everything has that you can put forward the programs that you had planned for, using those funds for. And what was I going to say about that? In terms of the grant amounts, it's about what was expected. There weren't, dramatic cuts for the most part. There's a few school districts that are involved in some specialized programs that will see some changes, but for the most part, the vast majority of school districts will see mainly what they had expected. It will be sort of down from the past, just because of census factors. So Wisconsin's sort of population census-wise has gone down, and also our poverty level has been about flat, but nationally poverty's gone down. So relative to the nation, Wisconsin's poverty is higher, which means we lose some of that title money. But those are all sort of normal fluctuations in the funding sources. So that gives you a little sense of what's going on there. In terms of the timeline, like how does this compare to how things have gone in the past? It feels like we're so far behind the past because of all the chaos that's been going on and the constant like trying to track, are we getting the money? Are we not getting the money? What's going on? What's attached to it in terms of guidance? But it's actually only about 2 months behind from where it would normally be. DPI would normally try to have this out in like late spring to help school districts be able to have budgeting conversations in annual reports. So believe it or not, it's not that far behind from normal, but hopefully we're on track for 25, 26. Now, not to get too far ahead, but I do want to mention implications for 26, 27, even though school business offices are really focusing on trying to make sure the 25, 26 budget is all set, all put to bed, and you're working on your levy. However, on the curriculum side of things, you've got the academic curriculum and instruction folks that are working on planning for the following year, maybe signing contracts, getting staffing planned. Nothing's obviously set in stone, but there's programming planning going on for the following year. And this is a time when we do talk about school business and the curriculum side trying to be aligned and in lockstep, but this is going to be pretty critical for 26, 27, because what can we expect from the federal government for 26, 27? We don't know. I mean, we really don't know how, because, and we know we don't know because of how crazy and chaotic it has been. And there's no reason to suggest that that chaos is not going to continue. However, we do have some indications of what's going to happen. The sources of funding, the title programs that were frozen in 24, 25, or for 25, 26, give us an indication of where the federal government might want to go. At least the Trump administration might want to go, and the House, for cutting funding for next year for 26, 27. So things that have to do with immigrant students, English learners, anything having to do with immigrant students of any kind, anything having to do with trying to address equity in any way, or just random things that they don't want to fund. We might have a sense Title II might be on the chopping block, Title III might be on the chopping block. We have a sense that maybe Title IV might be somewhat left alone because Title IV-B, the community learning centers, that was the first thing to be restored, and there's some indication that they don't want to kind of touch that again. Title IV-A might be able to kind of ride the coattails of that. But anyway, the action steps that we wanted to point out was that we want to sort of suggest the business office and the curriculum folks stay really closely communicating and aligned for future planning. And to the extent that you have an opportunity to communicate the value of the federal funding that you receive and what you use it for and how critical it is and what would happen if you didn't have it, to your school board, to legislators, in community conversations, to federal legislators. Those are going to be critical because the pushback that we provided as an education community, both at the state level and at the federal level, made a difference. It's partly why, and maybe completely why, those frozen federal funds were restored. Things are going to happen if we're not on top of it. It is sort of the point. And that's our job at the state level, but certainly at the local level as well, getting that communicated. And in terms of like, can we sit pretty? Can we sort of relax for 25, 26? Probably, but you never know in terms of what the Trump administration might try to pull. And for 26, 27, all bets are kind of off. So we'll keep you posted. It's going to become an ongoing thing that we're going to try to keep you posted on. This slide that you'll have access to has some useful links and resources for tracking what's going on as well.
Brian.
Just for that timeline, I was wondering if maybe Mike, you could reach out to Jennifer. Yeah, everything's pushed back 2 months, but some of us use these grants for cash flow purposes, to float us through the end of November. And with everything pushed back 2 months, I'm really concerned that we're not going to get an approved budget to be able to submit our first claim before the end of November. Because some of us need that money to hit that last week in November. And I'm wondering if DPI can put some guarantees out there that if you submit by September 5th or whatever, you will have an approved budget by this day so you can make a claim.
Okay, yeah, I can check into that.
So, Ann, let me ask you a question. What if you're Brian or Andy and you've got a director of professional development or CNI who comes to you this fall and says, hey, I'd like to sign a contract with Sun Prairie Consulting on early literacy, especially for ELL kids. And this is for July and August of 26, and we plan to use Title II funds. What I hear you saying is be careful about signing that.
That would be a perfect example because Title II-A was one of the frozen funding sources from 25, 26. So, and PD was one of the biggest things when we asked school districts, how's this going to affect you, these frozen funds? What are you going to do about this? And a lot of people said, we're going to keep offering the PD, but we have to dip into reserves, or we're not going to offer the PD at all. So Title II would be one of those areas to be very careful about making any kind of long-term commitments for those funds. It's just tough.
Yeah,
it's tough.
Yeah, I will say Title II was mentioned under the AI stuff that they want to use that funding to educate people on AI. I mean, it was brought up in that. piece. So
Okay.
it may
It
still be
might,
there. You just can't use it for what you used to use it for.
All right.
yeah, right.
And I know you spend, for every 1 minute you're on here with us, you probably spend 50 hours reading and researching and trying to keep up with those federal stuff. It's been quite a roller coaster for several months now. Thank you for all that. And thank you for this quick update. And these slides will be on the Money Talks webpage, and this is being recorded. So if you're looking for these links, you can get those right after we're done here this morning, okay? Well, cool. Let's thank Ann, and let's move into part two, which is our levy forecast. Speaking of AI, when you put in AI and say, I need help with the levy, things happen, and uh, that's why we have this tribute wall for Eugene Levy joining us this morning. Um, so you guys live in this every day. You know what's coming, right? This is a combination of what's happened with the state budget and where you are situated in your school district. I'm going to try to get through a few of these slides quickly so we can talk about what your strategy is around the October tax levy. So we've got some things that are driving up the tax levy. We anticipate. So the $325 per pupil increase in the revenue limit, which is a good thing. Schools need revenue to operate. And that's universal across the state. And so is the second bullet, the lack of the typical levy offsets. So, there's no increase in the equalization aid or general aid. Instead, there's a big income and sales tax cut in the state budget. It's like $1.5 billion in revenue that the state will forego in this 2-year biennium. So maybe that's where the tax offsets went. They certainly didn't go within the K-12 area. Other things that can drive up your levy, and these next three are very dependent on where you are, include your 3-year rolling average, obviously, of enrollment, whether or not you've got an operating referendum that's going to kick in or grow. And then, of course, there's an increase in the dollar amount per pupil for the vouchers again. So if that's a big deal in your area, that could help drive your levy. So there's a lot of upward pressure on the tax levy this coming fall, more so than we've seen in past years.
Hey,
Um,
Mike,
yeah,
another category that we didn't touch on, and really it's based on where the district is and what's happening, but around the Madison area, we have a lot of special needs students showing up at our door. And if they come from other districts, transfer of service can be a significant impact as well.
thank you, Andy. It certainly can. And it reminds me to remind you, if you're not up to speed on high cost special ed, there's a lot more money put into that bucket for this coming year. So take a little time and get on the DPI website and read about high cost special ed. It might be you might be earning thousands of dollars per hour spent learning about that. It's certainly worth your time. So okay, so across the board, a lot of upward pressure on the tax levy. Um, One of the things we just pointed out was this lack of tax levy offsets, and this was documented in some papers from the Legislative Fiscal Bureau. This one's hard to read, so I just wanted to show you the cover in case you want to look it up yourself. It's page 33 of this report on state aids. But let's zoom in on it a little bit and take a look at what's happening with equalization aid. Um, the bar that's highlighted shows equalization aid history going back a number of years. And other than some turbulence around the Great Recession of 2009, 10, 11, and the policy choices that were made around that, ever since then, there's been a steady increase in equalization aid, but not this time. So this is, as far as we know, unprecedented that the state would take a pass for 2 years on an equalization aid increase, especially when the state's not really in any financial duress. So, so that's going to cause some, interesting dynamics at the local level. Essentially, the sort of the tax levy hot potato is being tossed into the laps of the school board members this this fall. Here's another take on this, also from the Legislative Fiscal Bureau. That's just the header of a report that was done this summer, not that long ago, just a few weeks actually, on the property tax estimates under Act 15, which is the new state budget. So in case you're wondering if you're kind of alone or out there in terms of your levy being a little high, this is the statewide view of, it's based on this new state budget. Again, the bar, and it's kind of highlighted in yellow, shows that last fall the levy increase on average statewide was 5.7%. This coming fall, it's projected to jump to 7.4, and then that's followed by a 6.8. So, of course, these will vary, right, substantially based on local circumstance, but the trend is definitely upward. And a lot of implications for that, I think, in terms of board relations, and is this the right time to do an operating referendum, or, how do we, keep the peace with the taxpayers and so on.
Mike, this slide's interesting too, because schools are forecasted to see the highest increase, so you might see more pressure from municipalities and the counties for school districts to keep their increase down.
Yeah.
Because all that flows up to the municipality initially, and some people feel like it's the city's fault that taxes are going up when it could be more on the school district. And I know our community is getting more frustrated with the school district because they get blamed for everything. I said, well, we're doing everything right. So
thank you for mentioning that. In terms of communication, it doesn't hurt to go sit down with the city manager ahead of time, because they do catch some flack, for the back tax bills. And of course there is the occasional municipality that doesn't hesitate to dunk on the school district, saying, well, we're doing everything we can, but the school district is spending like crazy. So, getting this straight with your municipalities, plural, is probably time well spent. I should mention that we usually have a pretty lively chat going during Money Talks, and often you can learn as much from that chat or more, because there's, you collectively know more than the small group that we have on here. So please, if you want to chime in on the chat, please do so. And in June, somebody put in, can't Mike please turn off his camera? Which I didn't really, I didn't think that was necessary. So we're not really looking for those kind of contributions. But if you have something to say about the levy, this would be your chance to do it. So look, overall, we're looking at a kind of an inflated picture on these levies. So that's where we kind of shift now into some advice or some commentary, right? You can't really pull off a one-year solution here, right? Because we got the same picture repeating in the second year. It's 2 years of no equalization aid. So want to emphasize that it's a 2-year problem. You've got to think in terms of 2-year solutions, and recognize that if you kind of impulsively, if your board, I should say, decides to under-levy because they just don't have the appetite for let's say a 7% levy. I understand that, but they have to do so understanding what's going to happen the following year, right? Right? That's kind of, you could actually create a situation where, what would you rather have, a 7 and a 7 in terms of percentage increases in your levy, or a 4 and an 11, right? Right? You try to keep the levies somewhat steady, right, with your taxpayers. So be aware of that. And we'll talk about that when we get in here later, into some later slides. So again, this is all just advice. I'm interested in Brian and Andy, how you handle this with your board. All we're suggesting here is that you start modeling it now, and update it, start talking to your superintendent and your admin team and maybe your finance committee. And the key thing here is you can't just kind of wander into the board meeting in late October and drop an 8% levy on your board and expect it to go smoothly, right? You've got to start warming them up. How do you guys do it?
Yeah, so we in Oregon we started doing budget work sessions typically in August. So we've already had one a week ago Monday. We're going to have another one this next Monday, and exactly that, just communicating, telling people kind of what's happened, what the impact of those things are. We talked a lot about uncertainty that's happening, and kind of mentioned that a little bit ago, and how fund balance is important and how that can help buffer any surprises that come as we try to navigate through this. And that's a theme that we've talked about here before. So I think our board's interested in that type of thing, making sure that they can take care of the needs of the kids. And if they levy a little higher, that's okay with our board. Each board is going to be different, but I think having that conversation about uncertainty is an important component of what you're going to be talking about here.
Yeah. How about you, Brian?
Yes, we kind of started our budget conversation this last month, and usually I don't have to focus too much on the tax levy or mill rate because it is just what it is. And in these different times, it's going to be much more challenging, and trying to keep the board not glazed over on what the actual impacts are. Because the board in Menasha usually believes that the community supports us, so they're fine with any increase. Usually we have probably about 16 people that are unhappy with anything that we do, but they're also the very loud ones. Everyone else just stays quiet, so then you get the impression that everyone in Menasha is upset, and it's not really the case. But yeah, like Andy said, we have to run our different scenarios. We'll be looking at a referendum too next year, which plays into it. We do defease debt also, which also this throws a wrinkle in that too, and how that impacts the tax levy. So it's like kind of all the tools are kind of being thrown out right now, and trying to have to re-get everything back together.
Right.
It's a little frustrating.
Yeah. I'm reminded I have to tell a Pewaukee story about a board president named Ron Freed. He's long since retired. He was a tax guy at Deloitte. Anyway, he was the board president, and some people kind of lined up at the citizen comments section of the board meeting. There were maybe a dozen of them all together, and they kind of rally support around something. And they were trying to intimidate the school board. And I'll never forget how he formulated this. He said, "Well, we've heard from the 12 of you. And of course, you look at us, and there's only 7 of us sitting up here. But because, I did the math. Because the 7 of us represent 11,200 votes from this community. So we appreciate hearing from the 12 of you. But when you look at us, we want you to see 11,200 people, not 7." And that certainly had an impact that night. He's a good guy. Okay, so this sounds like a little bit of a sidebar. I wasn't really sure how to represent this. Your tax levy discussion this fall really needs to be put in some larger context, both in terms of your historical levies and maybe your ability to project future levies, which is very limited. But if you go to Wisconsin Policy Forum and look at some of the research, the policy choices in Wisconsin now going back more than 15 years, it's been to drive down the state and local taxes and drive down, largely at the expense of school funding. There's a reason that we've fallen from 11th to 26th among the 50 states in terms of spending per pupil. It's been a very deliberate policy, right? So we are in a kind of a larger context of having relatively low spending and relatively low taxation. We spend, what, 10% below the national average per student now? Yeah, that argument never really seems to cut a lot of ice with taxpayers. They're just like, hey, man, I just don't want more on my tax bill, right? But maybe if you're able to build a few slides into your presentation to kind of show the larger picture, the larger context of where we are, that might help a little bit in terms of presenting this levy. But hey, look, this is really where I wanted to get to in this conversation. You could have some boards that are like, yeah, we get all that, but we just don't know that we can do um, let's say a 7.4% levy increase, because that was, the statewide average. So, they might be looking at an under levy. There are a lot of pros and cons around that. And I just thought we should maybe try to explore a couple of those scenarios. Um, so, so here's one, just to get this conversation started. This is just a simple scenario where there's no presence of any non-recurring revenue limit exemptions. It's just straight up recurring levy. And in a case like that, um, it's actually kind of a simpler scenario, I think. Um, your board may want to achieve the immediate goal of simply decreasing the percentage increase in the levy. Oh, okay, right. Then we understand that. There's a mathematical and sort of budgetary perspective on this. And of course, the board also brings sort of political perspective to this. Um, so you might get that kind of a question, like, do we have to levy all of this? And if you choose not to, um, then you're either going to have to reduce your expenditures, which can be difficult this time of year, or you're going to have to cut into your fund balance, right? If you do under levy, it will be carried over. Yeah, it's line 8A on the revenue limit worksheet, and we'll show you a few of those in a minute. So at least you won't be permanently damaging your base revenues going forward if you under levy in this scenario. It used to be when they first had revenue limits, this is where I get to sound like old grandpa Mike here. There was no carryover provision. None. So if you under levied, you permanently damaged your base revenues. And it provided this sort of weird incentive for school districts to levy to the max every year, no matter what. And we complained about that. And after a few years, the legislature sort of grudgingly changed it to allow, I don't know, Andy, you might remember this, 75%.
Yep, 75%.
Right. So you could carry over 75%, which didn't really address the problem. If you're going to lose a quarter of your carryover, you're not going to do that, right? So eventually they changed it to what it is today with line 8A. So you can carry over whatever it is that you didn't under levy in your revenue limit calculation. But of course, like we were saying here, it does set up potential problem for the following year. And you just have to be cognizant of that. Are you able to have this kind of conversation with your board, Brian, Andy? Do they get
I
it?
think talking about the non-recurring, kind of losing that area. We have a lot of conversations around the Fund 39. Too, I wanted to mention too, just in case if people are looking at 39 and getting real creative and stuff, and if you've defeased debt, like through a defeasance agreement, that money goes into a trust fund and it's for a specific issuance. So you can't use that money to lower your Fund 39 levy. So those funds are gone and kind of you got to think about it. They already paid off future debt. You can't use them again for this next year to pay off some other debt that's due that next year.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just another little, wrinkle. Like that's not money just sitting out there that can be used.
Well, and if you do use it, you also have to think about the future, right? Because what happens the following year when you don't have the money? That levy's going to go up by whatever you used the funds for. So it's a long-term issue as well.
Right. If you have just a fund balance that's built up in Fund 39, maybe because like interest earnings or something, you could potentially use that, right?
Yeah,
But
that's the issue with what do you do the following year?
right. Right. It's going to look like your tax levy shoots up the second year, right? Because you don't have that interest income.
Correct.
So yeah, be very careful with Fund 39 in general.
Like I'm curious how many districts actually fall under scenario one, and if there's any districts on this call that fall into it, because I would have to imagine there's maybe 10, if I was to guess, just because the private vouchers are under non-recurring.
Yeah.
And so almost every district has those.
Transfer of service, I think, falls in that area too.
So recurring.
Right. right. Um, it's an interesting area. I just really want to encourage everybody to encourage their board to think long term, think strategically, and um, the only way you can do that is if you introduce the topic, early August, September, early October, right? Give them time to think and to work through some of these pros and cons, right? Brian, you just mentioned this. I want to bring this up. This is a more complicated example. Here we've got non-recurring revenue limit exemptions in this little example. So I'm actually going to take a minute to sort of walk through this slide. I know we don't like to read slides to you, but we want to emphasize the use it or lose it nature of these non-recurring revenue limit exemptions. I was in Madison for years, and that board used to just throw away non-recurring revenue limit. It's so frustrating. Um, okay, so here's our example. Two Twig school districts voters approved an operating referendum to exceed the revenue limit by $100,000 for this year and 125 and then 150 and 175. Very common structure, right? We've seen these all over the state. So if the school board decides this fall, because they're worried about the levy, that they're going to forego that $100,000 of additional revenue authority, it just expires and it can't be carried over. It's as if it never happened, right? The year 2, 3, and 4 are still out there when you get there, but that 25, 26 operating authority that you worked so hard to get and had an election for, it's just disappears. The same thing applies to some other other forms of non-recurring exemptions. I think we want to show a specific school district example here in a second. This makes sense. Have you guys been in this situation? I have. Yeah.
Yeah. Years ago, we used to do non-reoccurring capital maintenance for 10 years. It was non-recurring
Uh-huh.
because it had an end date. And so that would have impacted us at that point in time.
I wanted to have like an amendment to my personal employment contract that said, I'll go out and sell the non-recurring revenue referendum really hard, but you have to promise to use it. It's so frustrating to put all this time and effort in, and then it gets waived off. I'm like, oh, come on, you can't do that to me. All right, let's take a look at a real school district. So we blacked out the name, but it doesn't matter. You can find literally, dozens and dozens of school districts that are similar to the one that we have on the screen. So if you look at the first, and don't try to look behind the black to see who it is, just stop it. I know you're all squinting at the screen, see if you can figure it out. If you look at the blue star up in the far right, you'll see an underlay. This is for 24-25, by the way. This is done. This is their final revenue worksheet for last year. And you'll see the star in the upper right under the under levy line that shows just about 396,000 if we rounded a dollar. So that's an under levy. That comes from the other blue star, which is a little bit lower on the screen to the left, which is line 13 minus 14. That is the definition of the under levy right there, line 13 minus 14. It's here how much you were allowed and how much you used. So those numbers tie. So in this case, the board chose not to levy to its maximum revenue authority by some $396,000. And probably for tax levy and tax bill purposes, one would assume, right? What's interesting about this district, if you look at the orange star, is there's a couple of things going on here. When above it, you can see up in line 10A, they won a pretty big non-recurring referendum to exceed. And so that line is in there, over 1.5 million. And maybe that's why they felt that they had the room to underlevy. But the interesting wrinkle, Brian, you and I were talking about this recently. A lot of districts have this 10H. That's the voucher line, right? So the district is given a revenue limit exception for 452,000 plus, and they have to make that payment, right? That's not negotiable. That money's going out the door. But in effect, you could say they didn't really levy for all of it, levied for very little of it through the under levy. I mean, you could also say, well, they had a non-recurring referendum for 1.5 million and chose not to levy for the full extent of that. But these are the sort of interesting sort of dynamics that you get into with your board about the under levy. Okay. The I'm sure this board went through a number of scenarios before they settled where they did, but they chose to forego the $396,000. And when you look at the same district for 25, 26, now not all this is filled in yet. And you know the yellow lines get filled in with DPI data. You don't fill those in. DPI does. Thank you, Jennifer. But 8A has an orange star next to it. And you can see over in the far right, the under levy is gone. Right? They don't get to carry over that 396,000. So, but you'll notice that again in this district they've got a really significant non-recurring referendum providing revenue into their district, which is over $2 million for this coming school year. So that should put them in pretty good place. So they were in a position perhaps to under levy. But I don't know if there's one thing that's not representative about this. I don't know how many districts have that luxury right now. Yeah. So this is some of the politics around the under levy that I think are really interesting.
Look, I mean, there could have been a ton of examples for why they under levied. I mean, they maybe not have needed the money. Maybe the board said, we don't want to pass on the increase of the vouchers. Could have been like, we just didn't want the tax levy to go up that much. They could have had that much in their Fund 38 fund balance, and they were just going to make it the payment from there. So then they were lowering the levy. I mean, we're not saying that this is wrong to do, or if it's, this was a mess up. It's there's a reason behind it. It's just being able to explain, what the reason is. And, I always think about it as, if we have a referendum out there and we under levy, or even if we don't, it's kind of like an IOU to the taxpayers that are they going to, give that money back in the future. And I don't know about anyone else, but when the taxes go down, I don't get any cards or phone calls or balloons, flowers, none of that. If it goes up, I get a handful of calls. Even if we say that, it's went down the last 5 years, people don't care because it went up once. So community, if you're listening, a card or something would be nice.
Brian, you're getting lots of love. The emojis are floating by the screen right now.
I'm sure I'm the only district. All the other districts probably, get cards and stuff. It's fine.
Boy, what a shameless appeal for support. This is where the board has to really exercise some judgment. They have a long-term stewardship obligation, right? We're all just passing through. We're supposed to preserve and enhance and improve the district, right? And pass it on to the next group in a way that's better than you found it. And so you're weighing that long-term stewardship responsibility against maybe a short-term expedient, or maybe it's a short-term necessity, but that's up to the board to measure. But I think what you're saying, I certainly experienced this as well. The under levy that's really targeted at just kind of trying to deflect tax levy criticism is, that's just tough because these boards have all been put in this situation by state decisions that were made upstream of them, right? And if the state was that concerned about your tax levies, they should have given us more equalization aid. I guess that's my take on it.
This is an interesting conversation if you zoom out just in terms of what's going on with efforts to further limit referendum options for districts. There's several pieces of pending legislation that are aimed at, curtailing districts' choices and options when it comes to referendum. This is just an interesting conversation because one of those pieces of legislation is basically to get rid of recurring referendums. And so, yeah, recurring referendums are already less common because they're just harder to sell to a community. But in this scenario, having your referendum authority in a recurring might be better for your options because, right? Because you could do under levy and not forego um, that authority. It's sort of wonky and in the weeds, but it knowing what's going on, it's like having your authority in a recurring referendum is better for your options. Would you agree?
In this instance, yeah, there are other parts of that calculus.
That's true. There's an enrollment impact on that. You're right. There's pluses and minuses on that. Yeah.
Yeah, but your point you make is certainly valid. And so those among our sort of K-12 policy leaders who are a little wary of the state lawmakers have suggested that one of the consequences of the state budget, whether it was intended or not, is that the school districts will have higher levies, and maybe that'll poison the well and just make it that much more difficult to pass school referenda. Like we're being forced into a situation where we're exhausting voter support, and that might either persuade districts to not have a referendum or to have one for a smaller amount or not have one at all.
You
So
know, Mike, the conversation that we were having yesterday, you made some great points. This is recorded too, so everyone heard Mike made some great points. Um, Referendums are more about the concepts and what we're trying to do, more than how it's going to affect the levy. I mean, we're selling a concept or a vision or something that we want to do, and we need extra money for it. That the tax impact is a much smaller part because most people care more about what you're going to do with it, and that they can follow up with it, and track it and things rather than the tax levy. Because the majority of people do support public schools, and they will support the tax increase as long as they believe in whatever you're trying to do. So if you're trying to increase your scores or maybe increase teacher wages or whatever, as long as they believe in that, they understand it's going to cost more and that it's going to cost them more.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I don't know exactly what the magic formula is on this, but we've always suggested that explaining the financial picture to your board is like you said, Brian, it's a part of the story, but it's certainly not the whole story. Right? I'll just call it a third of the story, right? Explaining the financial realities and tax impact. The other two-thirds in your case would be, the Menasha schools are incredibly important to this community. Here's what we do. Here's what it's for. Or in the negative, here's what we're going to have to give up if we're not able to fund these things. And so it's maybe one-third about the sort of statewide financial picture and two-thirds about just that relationship between the community and its schools and its board, and its teachers. So one of the situations I got into that was not pleasant for me, this was back several years ago, um, um, was in the board, in my case, this was in Madison, they were under levied. And then like 3 weeks later, I had to sit down with the teachers union and talk about salaries. And it was very difficult for me to say, hey, we're really in a pinch. Because it took them about half a second to throw it back at me that your board did not levy as they could have. So don't cry poor to us. Um, my only way to get out of that conversation was to fake a heart attack or pull a fire alarm because they had me. I had no defense for that other than to try to say, well, the board has to balance the interests of the taxpayers and of the employees. But they knew they kind of had me. And that, so people are watching from that perspective as well. It's just another part of the picture that the board has to consider when they talk about these levy decisions, right? I'm sure nothing like that would ever happen in Oregon, Andy.
Never.
Okay.
Mike, can we explain this concept one more? Can you just go back one slide?
Yeah.
There's just some questions, and I just want to be crystal clear. So, like in this example, it was $396,000 that was under levied. So they wouldn't get that money, so they can't use it for expenses or anything in 24, 25. It's just gone. And then when you fast forward, because they have the non uh, recurring exemptions. So they have more than that. So then the next year, they can't recoup that money. So that 400 or $396,000 is just gone. Like it won't be in their fund balance. They can't recoup it in 25 or 26. So in this example, it's just gone. If they would have levied, they could have, put it in 46 or whatever. But again, they have different reasons for not levying. So that impact. So if you would do it this year, the impact would be right away on this year. And then next year, if you're in this situation, you would be able to recoup that money. So that's the basics of it.
That's right. Non-recurring exemptions are use it or lose it. Don't use it, it's gone. It doesn't impair your long-term base, right? But it does mean that, for example, if they, I don't want to, examples are too complicated, but yeah, your point is exactly right. They chose not to levy to the tune of $396,000. That money was out of their budget in 24, 25, and there's nothing they can do about it, right?
I guess another thing that pops into my head with this scenario, though, is even though it's a non-recurring exemption, probably going to be there next year, right? This particular exemption, because those students are still going to those places. So eventually you got to bite the bullet and get that money to pay for those students. And so all you're doing potentially is delaying it a year or two or, whatever, but eventually you're going to need that money.
Yeah, I'm going to jump ahead to the 25, 26 revenue limit for this school district. So 10, is it 10H is where the voucher
Yep.
drops in. It has not been put in yet by DPI, of course, but it will be. And yeah, you're right, Andy. They'll be looking at that again. And they'll have to make that decision this year, right? What do they want to do about it? And that's a really good point. So, years ago, this section 10 was like 10A and B. Now it's C, D, E, F, G, H, I. It keeps getting longer every year. Yeah, that's a really important part of the calculation. So, I want to make sure that we guard against sounding like we are just tax and spend maniacs here. We are not. I understand, as you all do, how hard people have to work in their regular jobs to earn the money to pay their property taxes. And if you lose respect for that, you're in a bad place. You really have to focus on that. So we don't want the districts to ask for anything more than they need.
And like you really need to know your community and your school board.
And we have
We all have our own personal beliefs, but we have to put those aside sometimes and go with the board and the community. Even if we know that it could damage us, but that's what the board and the community want.
That's right. So it's really a really interesting policy level discussion about what do we owe the taxpayers in terms of reasonably, a good financial management and reasonable burden, and what do we owe the students who, we are in charge of the school district. We have an obligation to provide them with a public education and a high quality one at that. So it's really interesting dynamics. And
It is because you are being put in a position, especially this year, that you aren't normally put in.
right.
Like $325 per pupil is not an inordinate amount of money to spend, and the state usually does its part. So the need to under levy is just a hard one to
Right.
explain to people.
Yeah, because our funding partner took a pass for 2 years.
Right,
Our
right.
funding partner is the state, and they just decided to whiff on equalization aid.
Like you're not putting your community in a bad levy position. I mean, you're kind of cleaning up a mess you didn't make, really, if you end up having to under levy.
Right.
Well, and it's like Mike said before, it's a 2-year thing, right? This isn't just one time. This is again. And I've used the analogy too several times in our annual meeting. Say we're a 2-income family here at the school district, and in this case, I'm going to talk about one of our partners, as Mike just said, just wasn't able to come up with their part.
I love that analogy.
Yeah, a lot of these districts will have general fund expenditure increases of 2.5, 2.3%, and then have a levy increase of 7. And people often confuse those two concepts. So that's you're right, and it's just school districts are kind of at the end of the line here, and this policy decision upstream is putting a lot of pressure on this levy discussion.
It's super frustrating to me because, like during ESSER, at least the state told us trust them and they'll backfill us, when it goes away, which they didn't do. But this time around, they're not even saying trust us, we'll take care of you, we'll make it up in the next biennium. I mean, could they at least just lie to us and we can have some hope?
No, they're saying your governor did this to you.
Well, yeah.
That's what they're saying. And,
Um,
the messaging to some degree is, we as a school district, we have to step in now that the state didn't kind of do its part. It's similar to the two income family idea.
And it seems like politically overall, and I won't get into a long rant, but it seems like the federal and the state just want everything on the local. And I think that's kind of the messaging that we need to start to shift to, that school districts are a local thing, and unfortunately, the local is going to have to pick up the cost because, our external sources are going away or dwindling. Obviously, the state's not going to pull out everything, but with the feds, we don't know. So somehow get across that messaging without being doom and gloom and
Yeah.
everything's gonna fall apart.
well, you can see just from this discussion how many interesting aspects there are to this discussion, which is really, I think we wanted to end on just some overall comments, mostly around process.
Before can we just touch on the 12D? There's been a couple of comments on it,
On
on the
12,
revenue limit. So 12D is the personal property exemption. So last year we did have that outside the levy. Andy said that don't count on it this next biennium. So the state heard him, and you can't count on that for a revenue. It's going to fall under your revenue limit, so it's just going to go to offset your levy. So it's not spendable.
that's right.
So if you had that money in spendable for this coming year, remove it because it won't be extra spendable money, just like Andy said.
Yeah, Andy called it. It was a 1-year deal. That is not a recurring revenue stream for you. It exists entirely within the revenue limit, and that was confirmed by our friends at DPI.
Maybe Andy could say that the equalization aid is going to go up by like 20% this next biennium.
I will say that. I anticipate.
Or
Right.
better yet, revenue limit too.
Yeah.
I-
If this is all being recorded, somebody can share this with my wife, right? Andy's right. I like that part.
Andy's always right. Okay, let's go through some wrap up points here. So the new state budget was definitely a couple steps forward, couple steps back. And the levy impact is probably the largest of the steps back here. Puts the boards in a difficult position. And I appreciate your comment. We've heard some sort of, kind of sour grapes from lawmakers saying, look, the governor kind of bamboozled us with that veto for 325. And if he did that to us, then we're not going to give you guys any equalization aid. And you're going to have to fund his increase. It's a silly argument. Revenue limits should have remained tied to CPI like they were for the first 20 years.
And that's the point to make, right? 325 is, depending on your district, 2.5%, 3%, something like that. So it's not like, hey, we got a 10% increase.
Yeah. Start this discussion early. We've been emphasizing that all morning. a little nervous about this third point. You don't want to be alarmist. You don't want to talk an under levy into existence. Your board may look at it and go, well, we don't like it, but we're going to do it. And if that's okay, there's no need to oversell this kind of thing. It really depends. You have to read the room in your local district. Here's one for all the new folks, if they're not already rocking in a fetal position after this discussion. Make sure you get your board meeting set for late October. Multi-year history, some good context. And then this is just a personal observation. Boards like choices. They don't want to be forced into a take it or leave it recommendation. You can give them some options around the levy as long as you provide a very clear pro and con. Like, this is what you get, and this is what the problems are. It often works like magic because the board will be like, yeah, we're in control of this and we're going to make the decision. And then as Andy said, 2-year perspective is essential. So guys, we are running a little late here on Money Talks. We just hit the hour. Any final comments, Andy, Brian, or Ann?
I would just say take some time for yourself. The WASBO Fall Conference is coming up on the 2nd and 3rd, and there's golfing on the 1st or a hike on the 1st. I mean, that's a good time to kind of sneak away from the district, recharge the batteries right before the budget report and everything. So, I mean, try to take that time. There's some great sessions there too. But again, you can get away, you'll learn something, and you'll get recharged.
Awesome. Thanks. Anything else, guys? Well, hey, the recording, heavily edited recording, will be available later today. The PowerPoint deck will be out there pretty soon. And thank you for joining us this morning. I hope you guys had a great summer and look forward to seeing you down the road. All right. I think that's it for today. Take care, everyone.
Everybody.
Thank you.